Welcome to the Small Business Association of Michigan briefing, Thursday edition, coming to you from the sunny St. Ignace, so my third time north of the bridge in 30 days. So it's really been kind of an unusual summer. My name is Brian Calley, and I'm the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications with SBAM. And I am in cloudy downtown Lansing today. Today's our Thursday show, and we'd like to start our Thursday show off by welcoming a new member. Today, we're going to welcome a premium member, Peninsula Powder Coating. Welcome Brian Delfield and his team of 24 employees to SBAM. And of course, we're able to welcome this new member on behalf of our sponsor, Marana Group, a data document and distribution company in Kalamazoo. So Brian, you're on the road, you're headed up north. That means you probably had to stop at a gas pump and fill up your tank. And I think we're all noticing those rising prices at the pump. A few different things to kind of unpack here about the gas price situation. But first, let's start with Governor Whitmer. She joined with several state governors in supporting a federal gas tax holiday. So what are the chances this happens, and what kind of difference could it make?
Well, these gas tax holidays have been on the table. You heard me a few weeks ago when this first came up say, hey, Congress is thinking about doing this. And I described it as I think gimmicky was the word that I used. But the idea is that you would take off gas taxes for a short period of time. It's called a holiday. So say for 6 months, take the gas tax off gasoline. At the federal level, 18.3 cents per gallon is what you pay in gasoline taxes, and then diesel is 24.3 cents per gallon. So hypothetically, what would happen is that the gas prices would be lowered by that amount. Of course, we know that supply and demand price has something to do with the amount that is purchased. So it's difficult to just point to it and say, yeah, you take the taxes off and the price would go down by that exact amount. But that's the concept here. And what you're seeing are the people in the political world wanting to do something. So there's a lot of kind of finger pointing and blame game going on with respect to gas prices. We know, and we talked about it with our entrepreneurship scorecard previously, that the last two recessions that we had in our state, not including the very short-lived recession from the pandemic, but 2008-9 and 2001, we know that sustained high energy costs were a big factor going into those recessions. So I think all the political people are kind of spooked when you get prices rising this much. And so this movement in Congress is, maybe we can take the gas tax off and they can deficit spend. So what they're saying is they'll still send states the gas tax money as though they had collected it, but not actually collected. And so that's the concept there. And in terms of whether or not it really has a chance of getting through, I would say, normally these things don't, but also normally we don't see gasoline prices get this high with threat of them going even higher. So I think it's a better chance than normal to get past. But with as many moving pieces as there are right now and things that are on the federal government's plate, they've got a big spending bill as well in front of them, a continuing resolution and all the different it's kind of like you're turning into a Christmas tree, because remember the Build Back Better spending plan didn't pass. And so, there's other things that are kind of being debated on putting into this continuing resolution. So a lot of moving pieces. I think it's always difficult to get things through at the federal level, but I'd say it has a chance.
All right, and the legislature appears to be poised to send the governor a state gas tax suspension. So is this going to be an area of confrontation, or are we going to have potential agreement?
It's kind of, I'd say it's not surprising. I think it was kind of predictable that if the governor says to the federal government, hey, you guys should lay off the gas tax on the federal level, the logical next question is, well, actually, the state gas tax is higher than the federal gas tax. How about a holiday there? And but the state can't just deficit spend like the federal government can. So it's in our Constitution that we have to have balanced budgets. And so, but what the Republicans in the legislature are saying is that the rather than reduce spending, we've got all this stimulus money that came from the federal government, about $4 billion worth that's yet unallocated. Let's just take some of that and put it toward roads so that the roads budget is held harmless in the process. So with respect to the state gas tax is 27 cents per gallon. It's the same amount on gasoline and diesel in Michigan. And so by applying or by putting a 6-month, again, they call it a holiday, so a short-term break from the gas tax is they're talking about from April on 6 months. And then I would say there's been a frosty reception from the governor's office, and the lieutenant governor had been pretty explicitly critical of it, and the governor less explicitly but still critical of the proposal. So there is I would say a smaller chance that ends up making it through the process. Although I will say, even though this was a Republican response to our Democratic governor's federal ask or federal recommendation, that the vote was bipartisan. There were a couple handfuls, maybe 10 or so. I've actually got a list, not that we don't need to take time to go through the list, but of Democrats that voted for it too. So it started in the House. Now it's going over to the Senate. The Senate has already said they intend to pass it and send it on to the governor and just accept whatever fate, which again, at this point, looked kind of frosty, but given the trends and the pressures that all of the political people are feeling with respect to fuel costs, I think there's, I would say that this is something that's going to stay on the table for a while, even if it first gets vetoed.
And are there any other taxes that could be considered at this point in time?
Yeah, there's in Michigan, we're one of 6 states where there's not just gas taxes on gasoline. There's also sales taxes on gasoline. Sales taxes are a percentage. So gasoline is per gallon. Doesn't matter if gas is $4 or $2 a gallon, you pay the same amount of gas tax. But the sales tax, it's whatever the price is. And in Michigan, 6% is the sales tax. So at $2 a gallon, the sales tax that you're paying is 12 cents. At $4 plus a gallon, it's more, it's 24, 25 cents, 26 cents, depending on how high it gets. So actually sales taxes on gasoline are just as high as the gas tax is on gasoline. Difference is sales taxes for the most part, go toward the school aid fund. So there's been more reluctance in the past to take the sales tax off gasoline because it's a funding revenue stream for schools, which is a more popular item to spend money on. So so it's been left alone for a long time. There's been some efforts to change it. Jim Ananich, who's a Senate Minority Leader, Democrat from Genesee County, said, "Hey, the sales tax actually would be a better thing to take off gasoline, and therefore the money would still go toward the roads." And I think his thinking there is that there is a lot of stimulus dollars. A lot of it is already earmarked for schools, and so you could easily backfill that. So now we got all these moving pieces. Now, what if all of them happened? I thought this was kind of an interesting to think. So you got 18 cents from the federal government, 27 cents from state government, and then another 24, 25 cents in sales tax. If all of these things were to happen, well, you actually would see a pretty big difference at the pump. But they're not all going to happen. So I think everybody's kind of thinking one way or another on the world stage, this has to get worked out. And if it does get worked out, then things will settle back down into something that's more sustainable and not threatening to our overall economic health and overall economic security. And so they are kind of thinking short term right now. What can we do just to get through these coming months in front of us, with the hope that at the international stage, one way or another, that gets worked out and settled down.
All right, continuing on the energy theme here, you talked on a previous briefing about the study done by the Consumers Energy Alliance, and it showed the impact that would happen if Line 5 were to be closed down. So recently, SBAM took official action with respect to that report. I'm hoping you can share that here.
Yeah, I thought it would be nice to share with our audience that we don't just say words, we take actions. And so when that report came out, an objective third-party study that showed the impact on families and small businesses, that further increases the disruption in supply and increased costs that would come from shutting down Line 5. There's the Department of Environmental Quality, or it's called EGLE now, Environment in Great Lakes. There's that State Department has permitting responsibilities. We've got the court action that's being taken that we've been active in the past too, but also the Public Service Commission that has an open public comment period going on right now. We submitted just last night, and it was accepted this morning, a public comment in favor of the tunnel project and the importance of Line 5 being available in the future to ensure our energy security in the future. And we referred to that study and attached the study to get it into the official record, so that when they're making their regulatory decisions in the future, that they know, number one, small business needs reliable, affordable energy, and number two, here's some objective information that shows what the risks really are. So our association, we do policy development work and work with the legislature and the governor on things, but there's the regulatory agencies that we're also very active in ensuring that the voice of small business is front and center and always considered. So we're active on every front, very diligent in this work. And as we've seen, this was already something that we were paying attention to, and you've heard from us about in the past. And rising energy costs over the last year have and overall costs have been causing a strain, putting us on the margins of a lot of businesses. This is just one more example of the things that are in the tools in our arsenal to try to make a difference.
All right, thank you for that. And then I think one of the other things we wanted to talk about today in terms of the gas prices, or just what might we face in terms of logistical challenges or supply chain disruptions related specifically to fuel costs. I mean, clearly the supply chain is still not where it was pre-pandemic. So what might be impacted now going forward?
And looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I've got a list here of, there's several items that are as expensive as they've ever been in the history of the Bureau of Labor Statistics keeping track. And of course, expenses rise over time, but the idea that inflation over the last year has put many things at all-time highs. And some of the biggest movers during that time period, and keep in mind, this is before, these are stats from before we saw energy costs that kind of filter their way into everything. Hotels up 29%, furniture up 17%, chicken 13%, new cars and trucks up 12.4%, flooring up 11%, lunch meat 11%, tools 8.7%, baby food 8.4%. I mean, so these just go on and on. Car repairs 6.7% up. So that's where we started before we saw a much more drastic energy costs. And energy costs find their way into a lot of different things. But so that's kind of a given that's a risk that we face. What I don't think there's been a lot of focus or discussion on yet are the impacts on logistics and supply chain. So they run on fuel. So there's the cost, but also the potential for changes in practices. So trucking is still a way that things get from point A to point B. So you got a truck on the road, it's got a trailer, and it's full of stuff. And so there's something that are called deadhead runs, where a truck will go to get something, and they'll have an empty trailer on their way to get something. The idea of increased fuel costs really put trucking companies and logistic and shipping companies in a position where they really have to start being picky about what types of loads that they can take, and they can't afford to operate these trucks when they're not carrying, not hauling some kind of freight. So the idea that there would be less availability with deadhead runs is a real possibility and a response that shipping companies or trucking companies might have to take. But certainly just absorbing these costs into the shipping contracts is not realistic as well. So think about these logistics and supply chain companies that are trying to move things from places. They're already having trouble on the workforce front, like everybody else. They're already at a point where they have to increase wages and benefits in order to get people. And then you have this other item that is a major source of expense in the business, and it's really pushing up the cost of operations. And so it's not like you can take from employees, it's not like you can reduce wages, because then you just lose employees. And so it's really going to come down to the most profitable runs that they have to stick with. It's kind of, think of it like when a restaurant closes certain days when they're not profitable because they don't have enough people, when it's too expensive to be open. That the idea that shipping and logistics companies would be faced with the same types of tough decisions if this is prolonged, these energy costs over time. I think supply chain disruptions and increased supply chain costs are a very realistic possibility for our future, and that's on top of these types of increases that I was just talking about. And there's really no business that is safe, whether there's direct fuel, transportation, energy costs in the business. These are the sorts of expenses that are ubiquitous. They just kind of filter their way into operations across the board. So this is the political people focusing more on it. They're worried about it. They know they have at least political risk with it, but really it's economic risk. And that economic risk is something that it needs to be all hands on deck. We are not international energy experts at SBM. We wouldn't want to pretend to be and know exactly what the right answers are on that front. But there are some things that are local and are in control of the locals. And that's why we're really trying to grab a hold of those things like just making sure that there is no disruption to what we do have right now, a pipeline that feeds the Midwestern refineries. I think is the least that we can do to ensure that it doesn't get any worse than it has to, given the global conditions.
All right. So while we're talking about rising prices, supply chain disruptions, there was a survey, a monthly survey, results released by the Lending Club, and it revealed some troubling findings that there's a large percentage of households living paycheck to paycheck. And so can you tell us what that result, or what the data is, and what those trends might tell us?
So it's almost 2 out of every 3 people living paycheck to paycheck. And so this index is updated every month. And in December of 2020, it was a little bit higher, but 64% right now. And it's been trending up for the last 6 or 7 months in terms of the percentage of people that are living paycheck to paycheck. Now, what does that mean, paycheck to paycheck? It means by the time your next paycheck comes, the last one is gone. There's no buffer there. So missing one paycheck is a big deal, or maybe another way to think of it is less than a paycheck reserve on hand. And so that's troubling, but not like shocking. But what I found perhaps the most troubling was that those households with more than 100,000 in income, 48% are living paycheck to paycheck. And I think it's just there's an accumulation of things that are happening, but everything costs so much more now that we can think of all these examples, but when you add it up together, it's really putting the squeeze on people. And so seeing that, after December of 2020, it seemed like it was, it started to head back in the right direction, and then it turned right back around, very, very highly correlated with the growth in inflation, and it's showing up in this and in just the regular household finances. And when we put all these things together, and to me it's warning signs in a lot of ways. And I kind of feel like it's just such a down report today, but there's we got international war and like the oil supply and kind of the spike in prices connected to an already constrained supply that was kind of trending upward in cost for about a year. So you have sustained increased prices, you have higher inflation. Before it was like, yeah, but it's okay because people got money and they're spending that money and it's driving all this economic activity. And we can't just rely that that's going to be the case for much longer. And when I saw the household income, the paycheck to paycheck stat again on the rise after improving from 2020 for the first few months of 2021, that I think it's a warning sign that this like pent up consumer demand is not something that we can just rely on forever.
All right, let's switch gears now to some issues at the state Supreme Court. So first, Attorney General Nessel made a request regarding the previous decision of the unconstitutionality of the emergency powers of the governor. So what is she trying to accomplish by asking them to reopen that case? Because wasn't the law repealed?
Yeah, this was, I had to look at this request from the Attorney General several times to really try to understand what is she trying to accomplish, because the emergency powers of the governor act, that was what we call the riot act. It was the emergency powers with no expiration. That there was a citizens initiative. It went before the legislature and it got repealed. Before it got repealed, the Supreme Court of Michigan said in a 4-3 decision that the law was unconstitutional, so it couldn't be relied upon. And the basis of the unconstitutionality was to say that it was an illegal delegation of authority, that the legislature could not give unilateral, unlimited legislative power to the governor. It's a different branch of government. And so this is something that's constitutionally controlled. And the Supreme Court said that was an illegal delegation. I know it's an old law. It was 100 years old when it got repealed, but it was illegal the whole time, basically. It had never been used in 100 years. It came after the last pandemic 100 years ago. First time it was used, and then it was challenged, and the Supreme Court said illegal. So what the Attorney General now is doing is going back to the Supreme Court, which is different now. So the makeup is different. You had one more conservative justice leave and one more liberal justice join the court. And so even though that law has been repealed, what the Attorney General is concerned about is having a decision on the books that says that there is a limit to the amount of authority, regulatory authority, that the executive branch can use. And this illegal delegation of power, having a decision sitting out there that all the other courts in the state have to abide by. What she's concerned is that regulatory agencies that are taking liberties will be too constrained with what they can do when they're writing rules to regulate things that they believe are covered under law. So this is something, it's actually at the federal level, a really active issue that that I think that the federal Supreme Court is very likely, given the makeup of this court, to say to the lower to say to the federal agencies, you can't do as much. You don't have as much leeway to make up rules. You have to be things have to be more explicitly delegated from the legislature, not these broad authorities handed over. And so I think the federal question, a very active federal question, it inspired at the state level for our attorney general to say, hey, we don't want this constraint on our regulatory agencies either. Now, naturally, we disagree with her on this, that the idea that rules, that when regulatory agencies write rules, we want them to be explicitly followed according to what the law says. We love the idea that something has to be in the law and more explicit for the regulatory agency to enforce the power that they have. And so this is one where we're actively investigating how we could engage in this process. Not clear at all whether or not the Supreme Court has the appetite to take it up again, because a lot of Supreme Court justices are reluctant to just overturn previous precedent, because as soon as you start that, then it means your own legacy is in jeopardy. So if you start the precedent of just throwing away previous court precedent, then those who come after you are going to feel free to do the same. And so I know there's some reluctance generally among justices to throw away precedent. The fact that this is not a long-standing precedent, I think makes it a little bit more in jeopardy. So stay tuned on that one.
All right. And another case that's been getting a lot of headlines is how to define sex as it pertains to gender protections in the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act. So remind everybody what the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act is, and then what this new case is about.
So the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act its employment and housing protection says you cannot discriminate on employment decisions and housing, and then discriminate on certain factors. And age, race, sex, these are all items. And sex has always been determined as, you can't discriminate against a man or a woman based on the fact that they're a man or a woman. And so there have been efforts over time to say, well, gender identity or sexual orientation ought to be a protected class under the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act. And that, those efforts, it hasn't been changed. The law hasn't been changed. But what at the federal level, there was a case that defined sex more broadly. And so what the civil right in 2018, what the Civil Rights Commission in Michigan said was, hey, the feds redefined sex, therefore, that's now how we should interpret the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act. And there's a case before the Michigan Supreme Court to determine whether or not the Civil Rights Commission in Michigan was correct in using that new federal definition of sex to more broadly look at it as not just male-female, but in a much wider context. So what does this mean for employers? For the vast majority of employers, I don't think it means anything. I mean, this is one of those areas. I mean, I know so many businesses. I don't think that there are, we have great members and they do great work. I don't think that they're discriminating against people because of their gender identity and orientation, anything like that. But this would put those protections into law if the Supreme Court upholds what the Civil Rights Commission decided. And so it would be an expanse of a regulatory agency, but unless your business in some way does exclude people, it wouldn't affect you anyway. And I know that there are some. Usually, this comes up in like religious type settings, and I think that's where this decision has higher fallout, higher consequences, higher stakes. Is either when it's a religious type operation that is exclusive in some way, or somebody who's operating a business but doing it with some sort of religious conviction. And in those cases, it potentially could mean something. But at this point, they just made arguments. Not exactly sure when we'll get a decision out of the Supreme Court on this one.
All right, well, that wraps up the show for today. I do want to remind everyone that we have an owner-to-owner meeting next week, March 16th, in Lansing. It's at High Caliber Karting. Jordan is a great member. He's been on the show, so you can visit our website, sbam.org/events, to learn more about that. But we will see you all back here on Monday. Brian, have a safe trip back down to mid-Michigan.
All right. See everybody on Monday.